Wasn't very nice. But what happened to the Copts? How did Egypt go from being the Egyptos, the Egypt? Well, it was conquered in the 7th century. But I'm going to give you the most succinct kind of short version. And from the death of Muhammad in 632 to 732, which is the Battle of Tours, Islam had conquered well over 2/3 of the Christian world. And later will go on to conquer about 3/4. So all of North Africa, which I just told you, was actually more Christian than Europe. This is what people don't understand. If you look at the 7th century and you talked about Christendom, most of it was North Africa, Greater Syria, as it was called, Anatolia, which is today Turkey. And then you had Europe, southwest of the Danube and Rhine, which is the smaller portion. So in that 1 century, all of North Africa, all of the Middle East, Spain, and then all the way into middle of France was conquered. Very violently and very horrifically and very savagely. And so this has always been, to me, one of the most amazing points that most people just don't get that. That, if you talk about the Christian world, it was a humongous thing, and it got conquered very violently and savage. And where does this come from? Does this come from a history book I read? No. It comes from the primary sources. Because if you read the history books, as I was indicating, they somehow make it sound, for example, they talk about the Islam's invasion of Spain as some good thing. In the year 711, Muslims entered and they somehow liberated people. But when I look at the sources, they talk about massive destruction, atrocities, etc., the destruction of churches, synagogues, also at this time. So it's to me, when you ask about the question of the Copt, it's just the whole. I just have to go off about the whole history.
Well, what's amazing about it is most people associate Egypt with Islam.
Yeah.
Like you said, right? We just think it was always a Muslim country. Mm-hmm. And if you actually study the Coptics, you understand that the Copts are the almost direct descendants of Pharaoh. And in fact, were they forced to become Christians? I don't know. But there is always this analogy that they say, well, the Christians were bad and they were violent, and the Muslims were bad and they were violent too. But the Muslims are now the indigenous people to those lands. And therefore, the white folk, the white Christian folk, is the bad guy. And you can totally justify the behavior of what happened with Islam in much of the Middle East, because that's what everybody was doing, and people chose to become Muslims. Can you just describe what happened specifically to the Coptic population? How do you go from a country that is majority Christian in Egypt to almost no Copts live in freely in Egypt anymore? Maybe I don't know what the population is, but probably less than 10% if I had to guess.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And actually, you made a good point I'd like to elaborate on, which is the Pharaoh connection. It's true. The Coptic language, it died out. And why did it die out? Because there was actually a point after the Islamic conquest where they were forbidden from speaking their language on pain of getting their tongue cut off. They had to learn Arabic. And the language, which is now used in the liturgy, the Coptic language, is the Pharaonic language. It's the final phase of it, which is kind of ironic or interesting, really. But so what you're describing, and I've seen it even worse. I mean, there's people who will tell you that the Muslims invaded, or when they came to Egypt, the Copts helped them because they were at war with the Byzantines over theological differences, and that the Muslims were welcomed as liberators. And there's all kinds of different theories that are they're not even theories. I mean, different narratives which are very popular and false. But the thing you'll always come across is when you want to know what's going on, there's what's being said in the history books, secondary history books, which are in Barnes & Noble, by a great best-selling whatever author. And then there's these, old dusty parchments that were written by people who lived there. And they tend to contradict each other, So I kind of go with the older one. So we have a man named John of Niku. I think he was a bishop who was living during the Islamic conquest of Egypt in the 7th century. We have his writings. He basically describes it like an apocalypse, I mean, it just horrific. It was the end of the world. Dead bodies in the streets, people eating the dead because of starvation, intentional starvation during this time of the conquest of Egypt in the around the 640s, and even a little earlier from the Arabs. And then we also know the Islamic law, which also pops up in the historical documents all the time, which is, the Copts were given three choices as Christians, as people of the book, Jews and Christians. They're actually considered a step up from straight pagans, so they actually get a choice. You can convert, be one of us, or you can keep your religion and pay a special tax, jizya, and be what's called in Islamic jurisprudence a dhimmi, which in our understanding would be basically at best second, maybe third class citizen who suffers all sorts of debilitations, is in no way, shape, or form equal to a Muslim subject. Can't build churches, can't build synagogues, can't even until today this is still the case, because in the teachings there's something called the stipulations of Omar, and these regulate what Christians and Jews living under Islam can and can't do. And it says you can't even repair a church. And up until recently in Egypt, you needed a presidential decree to fix a toilet in a church. And if you didn't get one, if they found out, if Muslims till this very day, if they see a church and they're fixing it, they will riot and destroy the church. Okay.
In modern day Egypt.
In modern day Egypt, yes. If they even think, sometimes they'll attack a house, a Coptic house, because they think Christians are meeting there and turning it into a church. Okay. And this all goes back to Islamic law that I'm referring to. So the Christians and the Jews had the three choices: convert, pay tribute, live as a second-class citizen, or fight to the death. So that's what governed all these Christians in North Africa and the Middle East. And when you read again the sources, it's amazing, because Tucker Carlson had this fellow on, J.D. Hall, who basically said the Muslims, his words, treated the Christians very nicely. Okay, very nicely. And that, again, that's a perfect example of someone saying something, who he's supposed to be a historian, I suppose, and it completely clashes with the primary evidence of the people living then who wrote about what was happening to them. It wasn't very nice.